Well, I've suddenly found myself in the middle of doing a bunch of things that I feel deeply about. And I was just thinking before this happened, I was just thinking about, what I would talk about, and how I would start to frame myself. Because every time you introduce yourself somewhere, it's almost a framing of yourself as a certain individual, so that
Yeah.
you're received and presented in a certain manner. So I realized that my default state of being is in an overwhelmed state. So I'm generally quite overwhelmed by everything that happens around me. I think I soak up a lot. I think that's the sadness and the perk of being an artist, where you're generally quite sensitive to your surroundings.
Yeah.
So everything that I do is an absolute reaction to everything that I see and feel around me.
Okay.
So if I talk about what I do, I'm an artist. I could describe myself as a multidisciplinary artist. Um, I am also the founder of this community space and a community cinema called Cinema 73, which I operate out of my garage in Seaview Township in Karachi. I'm currently an adjunct faculty member at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. Um, and academically, I've studied architecture from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm currently involved in pursuing a master's in urban design from the University of Toronto.
Nice.
So that's who I am, sort of credential wise. Uh, but I'm just trying to navigate my way through currently this city, and I try to translate and express my human experience through my art, and through the small scale art interventions that I keep doing. An example of an intervention is Cinema 73 on its own. So that's who I am right now, and also myself is a constantly changing, evolving um, being and persona. So right now, this is who I am,
Do
and this is
I
the first time I've also introduced myself as a master student. So that was really weird for me to do that
I
as well.
I I love how you structured that. Because you were able to very beautifully, not put yourself in a box, but also क्योंकि ज़्यादातर होता यही है ना, like अब आपने अपने आप को इंट्रोड्यूस करते हो, आपने अपना बॉक्स क्रिएट कर लिया, अब उसके अराउंड आप चलते हो. But because of the different things that you are doing, what you very nicely kind of showed was your form of expression through the different things that you do, right? Cinema 73 ho gaya, form of expression. Art ho gaya, form of expression. Urban design ho gaya, the way you think is a form of expression, and the way you kind of come out with that. Now that we have like an understanding of the topics that we can talk about, like I like to sort of like go inside, because in a lot of what you do, or jo aapne abhi bola bhi hai, कि you express the realities that you see, and you make commentary on them through the different mediums of cinema ho gaya, artworks ho gaye, and the city that you live in, which is Karachi, which upwards of 20 million population, like just insane metropolis, right? And a metropolis that sometimes people say is dying and is kind of crumbling. But as you also said कि आप जज्ब करते हो सारी चीजें जो आपके इर्द गिर्द होती हैं, and in a place like Karachi there's a lot of sensory overload. Like take away the fact that the physicality of it all, आप अगर खाली online देखें, और जो social media का जो वो stream है, constant news की stream है, which everyone kind of gets stuck in, this repetitive kind of race of being as up to date as possible, and then kind of formulate a conversation or a narrative around that. आपके तो like surroundings में इतना कुछ हो रहा है, and the way you kind of structure that through your work, like the latest work that I saw on Instagram that you did was why is it so difficult to be a decent human being, right? And the exemplification of that one piece, taking into consideration what's happening in the societal narrative. Like there's so many different things that you're kind of taking on there, right? Like jo aapne, like the things that you're outputting from all of the inputs that you're taking. So what I'd like to understand is how do you shift and choose between कि ठीक है ये मैंने cinema में करना है, because cinema also, like the space that you have, it, you call it Cinema 73, but what you're doing right now also, like the latest project that you have over there is something completely different, right? जो आपने एक दो दिन पहले announce
Yeah.
किया. So it's for me, it's fascinating that you are an individual who has the ideas and the means of being able to utilize your surroundings and express it a different way. Like for me, Caravan is how I get into technology and investments. Dastaangoi is where my curiosity kind of comes in for for Pakistan and the narratives about Pakistan and around that. And then I have other things that I do as well. So I would just like to kind of understand how you take and you consume what you consume and how you make those decisions. Okay, this is going to be what I'm going to try to achieve with Cinema 73. This is what I'm going to try and achieve with my artworks. This is what I'm going to try and achieve, because you're also teaching. And that in its own is a very different kind of facet job kar rahe hain, right? Because you are then having an effect on the later generations of artists or people that are going to go into the creative spaces.
Yeah. So I so you asked me about sort of how I isolate and sort of pick and choose what aspects of how to absorb what and express what in what manner. So I think for me, if I was to linearly kind of tell you how I go about absorbing and sort of vomiting things out, is I let emotion drive me. So I've always been sort of growing up as a guy in a society like in a Pakistani society based in Karachi. You're often called out for your sensitivity.
Yeah.
Men aren't supposed to be overtly sensitive because you're supposed to take care of things, and if you get too caught up in your emotions, you're not going to be well. This is an external point of view that I'm telling you, that you're not going to be capable enough of handling things, and men are supposed to get things done. They're not supposed to spend time being sensitively sort of emotionally aroused by things. So I am an extremely sensitive and emotional being, and I let my emotions um, channel through the different form of expressions that I sort of put out to the world. So what I've been able to do is now now I've been able to sort of use what was seen by others around me as something possibly, to put it blandly or basically negative, as my strength. So I mean, so if I talk about Cinema 73, it was this having moved back from college. It was this inherent and deep feeling of isolation that I felt in my own city. You spoke about Karachi being this, megalopolis, this, around 23 million people in one city. And there was this amazing article written by a friend of mine also, and a writer and a journalist, Natasha Japanwala. And she wrote this piece called Alone Amongst Millions.
Yeah.
And it was a piece on Karachi and how this huge city breeds this harrowing sense of loneliness amongst its people, because there's so much and there's nothing at the same time. You get so caught up in this whirlwind of, how you said the sensory overload, that you almost feel completely isolated within the eye of this hurricane that is, Karachi. There's so much going on here. So it was this crazy sense of isolation that I felt when I moved back, and I felt I needed to engage um, on my own terms as to how I see the city. I wanted to have a meaningful conversation with the city, with the street that I live on. So Cinema 73 came about through that sort of process. If I talk about my art, it's often how I very impulsively feel at certain moments that I go back or just rush to my canvas, and often just use that moment of pure feeling to express what I have to say. And then what happens is beyond the studio. So I often use my emotions as a starting point and as an inspiration to uh, then, put out the things that I put in the world. And I call everything, every outcome of my process that I do, everything that exits my headspace is an expression of mine to, I think, very consciously give myself the freedom of doing whatever the hell it is I want. Cinema 73 is a form of expression. My painting is a form of expression. How I hold a conversation in the classroom is also an expression of a certain state of mind. So, like I said earlier, that I'm quite overwhelmed, right? Generally. So when I even teach, I feel the need to connect with students in order कि अगर एक या दो कोई ऐसे स्टूडेंट्स हों जो मेरे एक्सपीरियंस से इंस्पायर हो सकें या उनको भी वही कैफियत महसूस होती हो जो मुझे होती हैं, which is of isolation and feeling like, feeling like you're caught up in this crazy sort of mess of a city, then perhaps my conversation or my form of expression can somehow translate certain mutual inspirations or
Yeah.
something that could benefit us mutually. So I think that's where it comes from. It's just like owning who I am in some capacity and letting that drive my process. So I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy the company of human beings around me. But on the contrary, I'm a very sort of antisocial being. If you ask the people that sort of I know, I'm a homebody. I stay on my own a lot, and I think that's also a result of that, right? Because I'm so moved by so many things that I now pick and choose what I want to be moved by.
Yeah.
And I think in like Karachi and the state of the world is such, we're constantly surrounded by this, you know, an invasion of, there's an invasion of imagery, there's an invasion of visuals, there's an invasion of sensations. I'm scrolling down my Instagram timeline, I see 10 posts and I feel a different way about each post. So there's an explosion of feeling. And so now to preserve how um, how I feel about certain things, I try to limit my uh, the social aspect of my life, and so it's often quite intuitive. It's quite emotionally derived, and then I utilize the skills that I've learned over my time spent in the multiple things I involve myself in to structure how to channel that emotion, um, you know, in a meaningful manner. And I often also think that sometimes people uh, do connect with my work is why they're able to connect with my work is because I try to make it come from a place of certain human truths, so
There's a certain
there's
honesty.
something real.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel this world is becoming more and more, it's just becoming so insane that only feelings would be able to uh, only through feelings would you be able to decipher what's right and what's not. So I try to hone and practice that idea of feeling things.
तो अच्छा एक सेकंड इस पे मुझे एक सवाल है in your opinion and in the time that you've spent in Pakistan and in Karachi and the people that you've had interactions with, do you think people think with their heart or like trust their heart more or their minds more, and then how would that relate to you? Because I feel like you're more of a heart person, right? Like आपकी honesty जो आपके दिमाग से नहीं आ रही, आपके दिल से आ रही है. And there's like certain places where majority of the people tend to be a little bit more analytical and are more true to their brains than other places where their stories are written by their hearts, where you see the romanticization of the narratives that are told.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. Um, I think that now, I think a lot of people don't have the time to uh, think things or think about things anymore. Um, so you know how emotions work is that your brain sends a signal to your, or how sensory feelings or sensations work is that your brain sends a signal to your body and you feel a certain thing. So I think people don't possess the time or forsat or capability
Mm-hmm.
to really feel things intuitively anymore. They're externally affected by everything that surrounds them, and I wish people would use their uh, hearts more to kind of get to the decisions that they do, because I think working and listening to your heart, it requires effort and requires a certain fine tuning. Um, and in this day and age, not a lot of people have time to kind of go down that road. So a lot of people, I don't think with their hearts. They just follow the sensations that are derived from their brains,
Yeah.
and they consider those as their emotional. They're emotionally driven in that sense. So, for example, if you see something on Instagram and your brain processes it to make you feel a certain anger towards something, you you might feel that that emotion is coming from your heart, but it's actually just a
A quick
sensory
response.
cycle
Yeah.
that's taking place. Exactly. So it's a confusion, right? I mean, maybe you can even tell from my words that I'm as I try to explain this. There's a lot of confusion in my own way of describing this process as well, because uh, it's just bewilderment. It's just bewilderment with what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And I think in some capacity, when I'm able to grab the bewilderment and channel it through my art, is how I perform as a human being.
On this, I actually have another question where the work that you do, जो आपने portrait बना ली या कोई artwork बना लिया, what is the story that you're thinking? What are some stories that you've kind of seen being told around the work? क्योंकि एक तो आपके दिमाग में होता है ना, like this is the instance, this is the now that I'm feeling, and this is what I'm channeling, and this is what I've done. But then there's an alternate reality जो हर art piece में, like across the world, or any artistic expression, is the story that the perceiver sees, right? And that's a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
form. And how
yeah,
they're gonna take this. Like if I look at a Picasso, it's gonna be very different. The feeling that I'm gonna feel, the story that I'm gonna tell myself about what he was thinking or doing at that time, to what maybe Picasso at that point in time was doing. Maybe he was like, "हाँ मैं तो chill कर रहा हूँ, मैं like अंगूर खा रहा हूँ, मैंने कोई painting बना लिया." But the other person, just because of some thought and some romanticized kind of notion, makes a different story. So I'd be curious to kind of see, um, in the shows that you've done, in the works that you've done, what are some like interesting or like peculiar stories that have come out?
So often when I initially started exhibiting my work, I've always had this deep desire that I can share my art with anyone and everyone, and I inherently still do believe that art is for everyone, and it is everyone possesses the capability to understand art. And but often at times I've been able to do that through a very naive lens, where I felt that if I make this painting, which I've made with a lot of jazbat in my own
Yeah.
studio, when it's going to be received, it's going to be seen with the same level of jazbat. But often enough people are just buying a piece because it may look good in their living room.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps that's something that I've learned through exhibiting in multiple places. Like I did this show with Misha. Misha is a friend, Misha Japanwala,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
we did this
she's been on my
collaboration.
other podcast. Really cool work that she's doing.
Yeah, she does fascinating work, and we had the show together where her body casts were there, and I painted on them. And then the afterlife of that show was that we took them around the city and sort of posted her pieces of her work, which was her body essentially, on different chorahas in Karachi and photographed them in order to just see an experiment. And we got some interesting feedback after that work, because some people said that what you're doing here is extremely otherizing, and you don't realize that what you're sort of putting out on the street is more than kind of informing people, or more than sort of giving people an artistic experience. You're just making them realize how elitist and sort of how boxed in art can be. And that was a very crazy realization for me, right? Because I was here's this young artist, these two artists just trying to, like, do their thing, and they've done this, like, cutting edge collection, and they want to showcase that on the street. But then you hear this perspective, which is actually quite eye-opening, because things are very nuanced, right? And where I may come from would be very different to where everyone has their own perceptions, has their own experiences. I mean, it would be naive for me to believe that I'm sitting in my air-conditioned studio, and someone who's come to my exhibit, जिनके घर में 1 घंटे पहले तक बिजली नहीं थी, उसका experience of looking at my piece would be exactly the same as how I feel about my work. So that it's such a convoluted and such a it's so layered, this idea that everyone should understand you. And I think as an artist, it's also a bit of a narcissistic approach, that I feel that, oh, my art should be understood by everyone because I've made it with so much pure love and passion. But that's where Cinema 73 came in, right? So Cinema 73 has become this research hub for me to see that, okay, is it really true that art can affect the passerby, the onlooker, the average person who's headed to work and really doesn't have time in his life to go to an exhibit? Can art generally can art affect that individual? And I think for me, it was also changing the definition of what art meant to me. And so I've broadened through Cinema 73. I've broadened my understanding of what art is. So if I'm a visual artist, in terms of, if I'm a painter, I showcase films at Cinema 73 to sort of see how the screen as an art form affects people. And I feel that in this day and age, we're consumers of visual imagery, and we're consumers of the moving image. The film possesses a lot more power than any other medium, because it's a sensory explosion, right? You see, everyone's watching videos on their phones. WhatsApp videos are a huge thing, and so I feel cinema and film is able to do that quite successfully. So I'm still trying to figure out if people can see certain truths in art, and if art can affect a large number of people. And Cinema 73 has become this sort of extended research experiment for me to figure out how much truth is in this belief that I have.
A point on Cinema 73 where I get curiosity, because I've never been there. I've only read about it. I've seen photos. I've heard about it. It's an open air cinema, right? Like koi bhi aa sakta hai, passers-by can sit in and watch a film. There's no ticketing. There's no nothing like that, right? So that,
yeah, totally,
in its own sense, is a different form of trying to engage the community. ठीक है? Because like आप चल रहे हैं, चलते चलते आपने interest gain कर लिया है, you start a conversation. Because also हमारे society में ये होता है कि you don't usually interact with someone on the street. It's not I mean, even in Europe, a lot of people kind of are not okay with this. But for me, I would, start up a conversation with a random person on the street. I have no issues with that. But I personally feel uncomfortable doing that in Pakistan sometimes as well, because, that's just the way society is. It's a little bit closed. कि ये जो randomly भाई किसी को आपने सवाल पूछ लिया, that's just not normal. It's not normally done. And like there's a multitude of factors of why that is, or why people feel that way. Maybe it's safety concerns, maybe cultural concerns, whatever it may be. But what you're essentially doing and the story that you're creating is you're creating these moments, right? These shared moments. आपका, I don't know how many people. I'd be very curious to kind of understand कि कितने लोग पूरी movie देखते हैं. अगर passers by में like आके बैठ के 5 मिनट देख लिए, 10 मिनट देख लिए, how many conversations start from that? How many stories are created from that? And how people frame that? Because a concept like this that is such a social experiment, um, for for descriptive purposes, I think it would be very interesting कि जो dynamic लोगों में होता है in behavior, because this is for me an experiment of customer, like not customer behavior, like of experience, like, and for me what's really curious is you being an architect, right, and wanting and being curious about urban planning. These are things that are all centered around कि लोग interact कैसे करते हैं. What is the reason for a building? What is the reason for a space? And then you look at olden times and you look at like the squares that you find in Europe and in Italy and places like that. Those were places where people met and people interacted and people spoke, right? France, there's these squares that they built. In our society, in Southeast Asia, it's more centered around religion. The religious outposts होते थे, आपके मस्जिदें हो गई, आपके मंदिर हो गए, आपके गुरुद्वारे हो गए. That is where your community kind of comes together and talks and shares ideas and does these things. So for me, it's very curious to kind of understand the story that you tell yourself and the thinking behind this, because that's kind of what you're creating, right? Like it's a social experiment जहाँ पे लोग आ सकते हैं, लोग एक दूसरे से बात कर सकते हैं. They can engage with another platform, whether it be cinema or whatever you may be doing, utilizing that space. And what's unique is a space is a space. Like आपके कुछ भी कर लो, आपने यहाँ पे स्टैंड लगा दिया, वहाँ पे कुछ और कर दिया, एक बंदा खड़ा हो गया, लोगों से बात करने लग गया, that's a space. Right? That's
exactly.
Unique identifier of that space. You can take a farm, you can create whatever the hell you want with it, and it'll have its own unique kind of properties. And that's what, in my view, like when I look at Cinema 73, that is what I see. You're trying to do. I don't know if that is what your mission was or what your goal is, but that's what I see as an outsider looking in. So I'd be curious, on the Dastaangoi premises, like what are the stories that have kind of come about from serendipitous interactions because of the serendipity of, walking past and seeing a film, or walking past and seeing people engaging in a conversation or in art or something like that?
I'm sorry, my phone was connected to my headphones and it just started ringing. So you were asking me what were the stories that I've collected, but and you said something after that, or
from the social experiment of Cinema 73. Like, I'd be really curious.
No, for sure. So that's the idea, right? That first of all, for me, the story of Cinema 73 itself is just so exciting, and I often label this as my urban dream, because here's this garage that was just a garage, and one day I just painted the walls black and put a projector, and we just played a film, and suddenly people are crowding about that space. Vice India wants to write an article about it, and here this is just a garage. So I just find that the story of Cinema 73 in its essence just so fascinating, that any place can become a place of interaction by just the articulation and the mixing up of certain things.
100%, 100%, yeah. Because it's the narrative that you're framing around the space, na? Ke ek ghar nahi banta jab tak log wahan pe nahi aate.
Absolutely. And it's an ode for me to the power that an individual possesses. कि आपके घर में एक कोना है, एक नुक्कड़ है, आपने कुछ वहाँ किया, which you just have to devise a situation that would cause a bunch of people to get together. And when you have people, you can start narrating a story, you can start propagating an idea, you can start sharing conversations, you can start sharing experiences. So again, with Cinema 73, this came this came about from this need to kind of interact with my community. So first of all, uh, the story of Cinema 73, it's super fascinating for me, right? And then Cinema 73 has sorry, has become this, you know, uh, a place to collect these stories. So uh, from the very beginning, a story was carved and created. Then when I started Cinema 73, initially I would just go around, put posters in my neighborhood, and just tell people कि यहाँ एक garage में cinema खुल रहा है, आइएगा. And लोगों को कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा था कि what the hell is going on. एक पागल आदमी है जो बोल रहा है कि और कि popcorn भी होंगे. So people quite were uh, they were confused about what the hell was going on. So फिर मोहल्ले के बच्चे जमा हो गए, and they were like, uncle, हम आपके साथ कुर्सियां लगवाएंगे. There's this crafting, this narration of this story for me that had already begun from the inception of Cinema 73. So there's been some really like spectacular moments for me. I mean, I remember there was once this moment where this woman came with her son in a Kareem, and she said, मैं सदर में रहती हूँ और मैं अपने बेटे को दिखाने लाई हूँ कि जहाँ जब बचपन में हमारा कौन सा she spoke about some neighborhood, वहाँ ऐसा होता था कि मोहल्ले में एक फिल्म लगा करती थी महीने में एक दफा. मैं अपने बच्चे को ये दिखाने लाई हूँ कि अभी भी ये होता है. एक दफा मैं एक बंदे से मिला, वो गुलशन इकबाल स्टूडियो, some far off corner of this like he commuted a long distance on his bike to get to Cinema 73. Once there was this family that got to Cinema 73, like 7 of them in this car together to arrive to Cinema 73. So for me, those moments um, became a story on their own. That there's this guy here who just painted his garage black, and then there's all these entities in different parts of the city, and suddenly these different individuals are are coming to that guy, right? To engage in this shared experience.
Yeah.
So when I would think about it in that light, it would just become so almost like it unfolded in front of me like a fiction sort of story, like this story that's happening, because I know the truth of Cinema 73. Like it was just a garage, and then one day it wasn't. Apart from that, there's been moments where we showed this film called a documentary called Shame. It was about Mukhtara Mai, a gang rape victim, and it was about her survival story. And one of the audience members in our at Cinema 73 was from the neighboring village of Mukhtara Mai's neighboring village. So he had some real life experiences to share about the film. I remember once we showcased this film called Donkey on illegal immigrants. And a donkey is basically a boat that that immigrants use to travel.
Mm-hmm.
And those rubber boats are called donkeys. And so there was this couple there who worked as domestic staff in the neighborhood, and they were like, हाँ हमारा एक cousin था जो ऐसे गया था और अब हमें नहीं पता वो कहाँ है. So these instances for me have been the essence of Cinema 73, right? The sharing of these narrations. Often there's these documentaries that we as sort of consumers of intellectual content go to these screenings, and we watch these like harrowing tales about things happening in the world. But often people who are busy trying to hustle and make money, like हमारे घर में जो domestic staff होते हैं, या people whose livelihood is dependent on their daily wages, they don't have the freedom or time to go and indulge in these situations. So for me, Cinema 73 is a creation of a story on its own terms, right? So it's these essences that create Cinema 73. And it was inherently, I made Cinema 73 with this idea of like this duri, this distance between people. I in DHA where I live, there's a neighbor does not know their own
Yeah.
neighbor. You know, there's
Yeah.
no interaction. You have these high walled houses. Uh, there's no conversation. You live in your own bubble. So it was from Cinema 73 was created as a reaction to what's become of our current
क्योंकि
urban
हम
reality.
हम बोलते हैं ना community के बारे में, we should create a community and the strongest thing is community, but then when you go to the essence of it, जो आपकी essential community जहाँ से शुरू होती है वो आपका आपका हमसाई होता है, and those
बिल्कुल.
interactions were, you know, in my parents age, like when I sit with them और वो मुझे बताते हैं कि हम जहाँ पे रहते थे हमारे हमसाई कौन होते थे, हम उनके घर जाते थे, उनका दरवाज़ा खुला होता था हमेशा, and then we'd sit down with them and we'd talk and stuff like that. That doesn't exist, dude. I've been, you know, in this house for like almost 20, like 15, 20 years, and I don't know any of my neighbors. And I think
Yeah.
that is more and more the reality. Although we are thinking about these communities or building communities. I mean, Dastaangoi is now, I think, a community. But do we really know each other? Do we really kind
Yeah.
of interact at that one-to-one level? एक तो ये बात, दूसरी, which has been, I mean, in the current state of affairs with the pandemic and with everything that's going on, I'd be curious to kind of take your, like your understanding and your take on the evolution of art. क्योंकि art कहाँ से आती है ज़्यादातर, like ज़्यादातर कोई ना कोई narratives हो रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में जो are like, you know, like stifling it, or there's some like very happy narratives that are happening, or there are some things happening in society, or, you know, like these kinds of narratives usually take on, like there's a war, and that then comes the expressionism. Like if you see the art that comes out of Egypt from after the revolution, like it's very like it showcases these narratives of people. So how do you think Pakistan's narrative and art expression of art has evolved? Because there are some incredible artists that are coming out of Pakistan, that are being now showcased on the international stage, which, you know, duly so. Um, but I still don't think they get enough credit. But still, these narratives need to be spoken about, and I think they're very, very important. So, I'd be curious, like, on one, the pandemic side, how communication is changing, like for the pandemic causing social distancing and, you know, lockdowns and stuff like that. How does that affect Cinema 73, that, you know, you can't, I mean, I don't know what the regulations and stuff are, but in general cinemas have been put to 20-30% occupancy and stuff like that, so that has an effect. um, but then expressionism of art and the things that are mattering to people and the narratives that are touching people, how have you seen that kind of that trajectory evolve?
So yeah, I mean, we were obviously affected by the pandemic. We were shut down for like the past 6 to, I don't know, 7 months. And I mean, I'm still struggling to. I'm still feeling the effects of it all, right? I mean, I'm trying to operate in this new landscape as an individual, as an artist, and as also someone who is who runs a community space. So, and I think the new initiative that we're doing with Cinema 73, which is sort of open studios, which is an opportunity for artists to independently and autonomously exhibit their work with their own narratives. It's, I think, it's an effect or of the pandemic, because I've through the pandemic and through being stuck at home, I've realized that there's been a lot of opportunity lost for a lot of people. You know, time hasn't been kind to a lot of people. A lot of people's, of course, businesses have suffered, and a lot of people's opportunities to share their work has suffered. So, Cinema 73, in its own capacity, I mean, I feel as a someone who runs a community space or founded a community space, I feel more sensitive and gracious towards my surroundings, and I want to evolve my trajectory to serving the people even more deeply now. You know, it's so that's something that's affected me as a community space organizee or organizer. And when it comes to sort of seeing how the artistic landscape has evolved, I steer very clear of trying to making statements for other people. So I can only speak about what I have seen and experienced. So because of being stuck in a physical space for so many months, there's been a lot of time to indulge in your own thoughts, and there's not been a lot of interaction between me and other artists. So the main sort of method of interaction has been Instagram, and artists heavily use Instagram to exhibit their narratives and their profiles. So there's been opportunities for artists also to attach themselves to sort of, so for example, fund for, uh, there was this project started called Artists for the Pandemic Fund, and then there was Artists for the Flooding Fund that
Artists
was
for
also,
the relief artist thing. Yeah.
yes, basically I'm messing up the exact words, but so I think artists are understanding the need to attach themselves to uh, realer causes. So that's been an effect of all of this that I'm seeing. Perhaps because artists have spent time on their own in their studios, they've indulged in the real making aspect of art, because often even I have this big thing with the art world, that it becomes a place, it becomes like any other sort of um, it becomes a social affair. You're right, you're going to these galleries, you're meeting curators, you're meeting
Clique
fellow
ban
artists,
jata
so
hai
it's
na
just,
आपका.
yeah, basically a clique ban jata hai, and it's just, it becomes really sort of um, basic. So I think that trend that was happening, which was, we were just blindedly just doing things because that's the way it's always been done. That's kind of been broken. So I think people have had the opportunity to rethink the way they do things, and I hope that a lot of people this would bring about a lot of refreshed ideas. And often I've had issues with sort of who I call, boring old people in big old offices, people, the sort of gatekeepers of certain uh, institutions and industries, who often um, do things their way because they possess a certain
It's,
amount of
it's
clout and power. And
yeah. They become
so I
comfortable
think
in their role.
that's basically, so I think that's been challenged because people are taking a lot more ownership over their own narratives. So I think this is an opportunity for a refreshed perspective. And I remember when the pandemic had recently began, Arundhati Roy wrote this amazing piece about what the world might feel like, and in it she wrote that, was the normal even is the normal even worth going back to,
Yeah.
because the world was in an atrocious state, but we were still busy being busy. We were just blinded by the regularities of life. So this kind of disrupted everything, and halted everything. So I hope this has caused us to think about things in a refreshed and more sort of empathetic and humanistic way. So I see artists attempting to do that. At least I think I'm trying to be more real through my work because of this.
That's awesome. That's good to hear, and yeah, I agree with you. To be honest, I think it's definitely made people question, but also on the counter side, humans I think are the most resilient. Like they will go back to the way they are if they're not as self-aware and they don't take this. Okay, we are
Sadly.
very good at becoming busy and continuing on the way we continue our lives. On a happier note, to end, I would have the last question, which would be, what is like what are some of the stories that you grew up with about Pakistan that kind of help you connect with the land or connect with the place? Like what were the stories that you heard growing up from your parents, or that in society or whatever? Like how do you define Pakistan for yourself?
Oh God, what a convoluted question. Because I'm having, as I'm growing older, I'm having more and more sort of issues with the way I see where I come from and what the idea of this obsession with the nation state is. And I
Yeah.
often ask these questions. But for me, Pakistan is home. For me, Pakistan is Karachi. For me, Pakistan is Karachi. And it's, you said what are the stories you grew up with. So I'm taken back to the house that I grew up in Gulshan Iqbal, where my grandmother was there and she would often sit with her pandan. And, there was this patli si gali that we would, often play around in. And I'm taken back to the physical features of that house. It had these beautiful wrought iron grill that surrounded the entire house. And there was Motia and Rat Kirani in the garden. And so I'm taken back to the aesthetics of. So for me, home is a sensation. It's a feeling. It's certain smells. It's certain kefiyat. It's more than this obsession with larger ideas. Home is Pakistan for me is home. Home for me is Pakistan for me is Karachi. Karachi for me is home, and home for me is a feeling. And these feelings are made up of certain tactile aesthetic qualities, which is this faded pistachio green, which was the kitchen of my grandmother's. This, you know, पपीते का दरख्त जो उनके घर पे बाहर लगा होता था,
Yeah.
often stealing a papita from the neighbor's outside garden because galawat ke kebab ban rahe hote the ghar mein us din.
Yeah.
So it's these instances, my grandmother giving me uh, uh 20 rupees to go to the gali ke kone wali dukan to grab a pack of chips. So for me, that those have become my stories, right? So more than someone else's stories, my stories are what attach myself, what I attach as my own memories to this place. And yeah, those are the stories that make up home for me.
I love it. Asad, thank you so much for taking out the time. This has been great.
Thank you, yaar. Thank you